Welcome to the BPD Bunch. I'm your host, Xannie, and today I am here with Alex, Katja, Jess, and André. Where in the world is everyone coming from?
I'm in Toronto, in Canada.
I'm in New Jersey in the US.
West Midlands, UK.
I'm in Southampton in the UK.
New Mexico in the USA. Haha. All right, take it away, Alex.
For today's episode, we're going to be talking about stigma. So this is a really, I think, very important topic because a lot of us deal with this in our everyday lives. In a nutshell, stigma is just a lot of negative attitudes or like biases, prejudice against people with certain mental health disorders. And BPD is one of the most stigmatized mental health disorders. I went to a BPD awareness walk organized by an organization called The Emotions Matter. And I made this poster for the walk, which was all about BPD stigma. So on one side, I wrote everything that BPD I feel like is not in terms of stigma. And then on the other side, I said things that I think BPD is.
And speaking of the Emotions Matter walk, Alex and I are going to be there with Georgette this year. It's on Sunday, June 4th. You can be there in person or virtual. Come say hi.
Please come join us.
You'll make our day if you do that. So let's get back to stigma.
I think that right now, the field or the psychologists or psychiatrists, people who are studying BPD really have a good non-stigmatized idea of it. I do have some experiences from school where I've had like more older generation professors who don't specialize in BPD say some very horrible things. This is a really hard story to even tell. I was in class and we were looking over a case of a person with BPD, and my professor was basically saying that BPD is in the DSM to describe something off, like to describe people who are awful. And it was really upsetting. I think at that moment, I just kind of looked down like at the desk and I started tearing up a little bit, but yeah, it was really hard. He also said something like people with BPD will have sex with someone and then afterwards decide that it was rape.
Wow.
This is a very specific type of person, and I don't at all want to make it seem like this person's like representative of a lot of psychologists. I hope it's not. In my own personal experience, I haven't even come across anyone else saying stuff like this, but it's out there and it's horrifying. And I'm saying it now more matter-of-factly, but to be real in that moment, I just wanted to like disappear. I wanted to just like be in the bathroom crying. I'm really proud of myself. I held it together and I like got through the class.
To make a claim that borderlines are all like this is horrible.
He also said BPD patients will run you ragged. They'll come to you and say that you're the best therapist ever and you're going to understand me, and my last therapist was just so horrible. And like, look, does this happen? Yeah, it happens. But not with every single person. And I don't think it's okay to put everyone under a label and just say like, if you have a borderline patient, they're going to be horrible and they're going to work you so hard and you're never going to want to work with a borderline ever again.
You know, I mean, we're not all the same. And there are so many different things that are going to influence how somebody expresses BPD. You know, some of that's just going to be their own personality traits, their own values, their own unique experiences. You can't really ascribe that any one of these sort of stigmatized label to the group as a whole and be like, everyone in this group is like this.
Yeah.
Just to call someone a borderline, it's just like, it's like you're calling like us like a certain species. Like we're a certain breed of human. I've never gone to a therapist and talked trash about an old therapist I had. I've never done that.
He's kind of teaching his students to doubt the validity of anything their future patients with BPD might say. And I think that's really problematic because it teaches learned helplessness. It teaches people to be like, well, they're not going to even listen to me, so why reach out for help?
You know, I do want to counter this by talking about something that I heard. I was at the NEA BPD conference this past weekend. One of the women who was running the conferences was like, I love working with people with BPD. And I was like, yes, like It is, I mean, to me, it's like, this is what I want to do because it's challenging and it's rewarding. Like, people with BPD can change, and maybe not everyone is ready to change, but when someone's in a place where they're ready and willing to put in like the serious, hard, difficult work, it's like, as a therapist, it is very rewarding to see that change occurring.
I'm thinking of like one story in my workplace. I was working with somebody as a client who had BPD and other diagnoses, and this was, somebody who other people around me described as being challenging to work with. And I never found this person challenging to work with. I felt a lot of empathy for them. I felt like I kind of connected and could understand to a certain extent what they were experiencing. But, the organization I was working with was really unhappy about a lot of things that had occurred. And so, I had a colleague say to me, not knowing that I had BPD, saying to me, like, this client has BPD. They're not trustworthy. Like, you cannot trust what they say. You cannot trust that they're engaging with you in an effective or meaningful way. But they just kind of kept going on telling me like how this client is just basically manipulative and untrustworthy. And I got really, really upset with that. And I kind of turned around and I just told her, like, I have BPD and I'm gonna like be working with this client in this way from now on, sort of thing. But that was the first time that somebody not in the mental health care system like explicitly turned around to me and said something so stigmatizing about BPD.
I've been given some thought about this, and I feel that a lot of us, unfortunately, when we were maybe younger, didn't have our needs met, so we had to find almost very much on the borderline of coercion to get parents or caregivers to do things for us, because asking them in the normal ways wouldn't necessarily work. So sometimes I think there can be a little bit of the overflow of, what worked for you as a child, you often try to carry it through into an adult. And unfortunately, I think people in general, a lot of people do not understand what manipulation is in the true definition of it. So it's quite easy for people to use these words.
And it's not just that like it hurts when somebody calls you manipulative. It's that it's like a really big disregard for what's actually going on internally inside of you. So it's not like somebody's just calling you a name or whatever. It's also like a deep invalidation of what it is that you're actually experiencing and what it is you're actually trying to do, which usually exacerbates the symptoms that are already there, right? Because you're already feeling like your needs are unmet, you're already feeling invalidated, you're already feeling like at a loss. When you're in a situation and somebody's coming across maybe like harmful or manipulative, or is coming across like they're trying to coerce or whatever it is, like, I know often with me, the best response to get me to like completely calm down is being treated with empathy and love. And I think people get confused. They think that having boundaries means that they can't be empathetic with that person. Like, no, that's not what that means at all. You can have boundaries and not enable certain behavior while also being kind, while also validating, while also, using language to show that you understand that somebody's hurting, right? And I think that piece is often missing on how to address the kind of behavior that tends to lead to the stigma and stereotype of BPD as manipulative.
Well, Jess, what you were saying too about how like when you call someone manipulative, it kind of just makes things worse. It's the same as another stigma against BPD, like calling someone attention seeking or crazy. Like there's a Taylor Swift lyric that I love. It's like, every time you call me crazy, I get more crazy. What about that? And it's like, it is so like that. If someone's gonna call me crazy, it's gonna make me angry. It's gonna make me feel like, I don't know, a lot of shame, a lot of self-hatred, and it's gonna make me probably act out in ways that it's like it's a self-fulfilling prophecy kind of.
I definitely think if someone calls you crazy or calls you manipulative, it shifts the blame or the focus from their behavior onto you. So, for example, if someone calls me crazy, it's not necessarily that, you know, my behavior is out of order. It's that it's easier to blame somebody else for their behavior than to take ownership of something that you might possibly have done to cause it. Obviously, that's not always the case, but I've definitely found in the past that if there's been an issue, like people have turned it around onto me rather than looking at their own behavior and seeing what has potentially caused that reaction from me.
The worst thing I think too is like when you're in an argument with someone or there's something going on and you're acting in a certain way and someone's like, if this is your BPD, isn't it? It's like, no, I'm a human and I'm having an emotional response to something. And it doesn't even need, at this point, it's not even an extreme emotional reaction. It's just a normal reaction. But now that I have a BPD label, anything I do, anyone's going to look at me and say, oh, that's just a BPD response.
I experienced that in a job that I had fairly recently where I was kind of treated like there's emotional Xannie, you know, like nothing I do could possibly be contributing to her negative emotional state. She's just got all these disorders and it's her with the problem. And you know, I realize that some of the things that I do may seem big and over the top, but it's like I'm not reacting to nothing. And that does not mean that all of my emotional reactions are justified either, but it is very difficult to navigate situations when it seems like other people can just be like, oh, well, you've got this disorder. So even if somebody only contributed 10% to a falling out, they can't even own that 10% because you've got the diagnosis. You're the one with the issue. Can't be me.
I think as well, when you look at BPD, like behaviors, so to speak, like people with BPD are viewed so differently in terms of how they express emotions. So, you know, you can't be angry as somebody with BPD, you're having borderline rage, or you can't be upset, you're manipulative. Like the lens in which you're viewed is really skewed compared to normal people. And I think that's, I say normal people, but, you know, people that don't have BPD. But I think that's something that you have to consider as well. Like the stigma also goes into language a little bit as well.
It's like a double-edged sword too, because if you're not acting in these stereotypical ways, it's hard to get a diagnosis. It's hard to get any like treatment or help, or, you know, it's the assumption is like, oh, you're fine. I kind of felt like that. I always felt like if I wasn't exhibiting these things, people didn't believe me. People didn't believe that I was hurting. People didn't believe that I was in pain. People didn't believe, you know, I'll still tell friends who've they've never seen me lash out, or they've never seen me be in crisis. They weren't around when I was suicidal or whatever it is, and they're like, are you sure you have BPD? And it's the worst feeling. It's super invalidating. And it's like, you know, just because I'm not this stereotypical raging person doesn't mean that I'm, you know, that this isn't me.
Well, it's so interesting because it's like, even I was a person that acted these out, and people still had a hard time committing to the diagnosis. Like mental health, some of the mental health professionals I saw, and I don't know if it was because their assumption was that someone with BPD is acting out in every single interaction or something like that. But it was like, if I could have a rational conversation, well, you're not screaming right now, so clearly it must not be BPD because they're like crazy all the time. I was left really confused as to what was really going on with me. It's part of why it took me until my late 20s to actually do DBT. I think the way most people interpret personality disorder is this diagnosis is your personality. And the truth, I think, is that this is something that affects your personality, right? It's like, it's almost like, you know, a filter, like through which some of your other personality traits come out. And depending on what those are, they'll be different. But it's not like it is your personality. But I think that's how a lot of people interpret that. Certainly the way in which a lot of the stigma comes out, right? Like they're all liars, they all do this, they all da-da-da. I mean, just baseline, you only need 5 of the 9 criteria to be diagnosed. So how could you say that they're all the same? Just mathematically, there's 256 combinations of those traits.
I do have to say, coming from someone from the mental health field, I see a huge change. And I know like research has shown too that the view of people with BPD in mental health fields has really improved a lot over the past 15 years. That doesn't mean things are perfect. There is a lot of call for change and a lot of call for, trying to deepen an understanding of what BPD really is, a call for including people with lived experience in research and taking our own experiences, because, when we look at the DSM and, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual and stuff, the symptoms listed there are all outward behaviors. They're all things that are observable by other people, really, except for maybe emptiness and identity. But for the most part, it's the stuff that how it looks on the outside, not how it feels on the inside. And I think, honestly, what the more important thing is how we feel on the inside, because it's not about, always treating what it looks like. It's treating what it is for us. And so it's really awesome that push is happening. And the idea that people with BPD are manipulative is starting to be challenged, and mental health clinicians are starting to realize, that these are just ways that we've come to behave based on what's worked in the past in our lives, and because we don't have any better tools or ways to express ourselves. So I do see that as a really positive, and there's still a long way to go for sure.
When I think back to times, there have been times that I would say that I potentially have been manipulative. So I don't want to kind of program say that nobody ever, because every human being at some point has used some form of manipulation to get what they want. The difference is it's how I think the person performing that act perceives it to be at that moment in time. Like I said earlier on, we're indoctrinated into certain ways of being. And unfortunately, if I was saying earlier on, if medical professionals are perpetuating this thing that this is what these people are like, it's like going to school. You learn from your teachers initially, and you don't have any way to look at it differently. So when I first looked up things on the internet, I was so scared to tell people that I had this diagnosis.
I've been called manipulative most when I'm in periods where I'm like self-harming or suicidal, and because those are actions that scare people, right? Those are very extreme actions to try to get your needs met, and it's not an effective way of getting your needs met, but it scares people. And I feel like that's a lot of the same fear that exists in the mental health world as well, with like therapists, and it's like the extremeness of having clients or having patients who are self-harming regularly, who are suicidal, who are engaging in suicide attempts, which a lot of us have and do. And like when I was diagnosed, love that psychiatrist because she diagnosed me and I needed that, but her immediate thing was like, this is BPD, here are the symptoms. When you go out and you're looking for therapy, look for therapists that know how to engage in DBT, but don't start by telling therapists that you have BPD. She was like, when you have your first consults with therapists, don't tell them that you have BPD. They won't want to work with you. And that was my instinct to that advice was that like, no, I don't want to work with somebody who isn't going to embrace and accept and really understand BPD. So I'm not going to follow that advice. But that was the first piece of advice that I got when I was diagnosed.
For me, just like on a related note, slightly related note, I kind of really didn't feel stigma that much until the article on the Mental Health Project was featured in The Guardian. So I've spoken about this before, but it was covered in a national newspaper. And it was basically a column that praised people for things that they did for other people. It was called Guardian Angel. And I was featured in that column for what I did with Sorry, My Mental Illness Isn't Sexy Enough For You. And it mentioned quite clearly in the article that I was a teacher. Now, my diagnosis has never been a problem at work, like working with children and things like that. My work have always been really supportive, encouraging me to speak about it at work, to staff members, deliver training on BPD. Could not have asked for better employers. And I think I was a little bit naive in some ways to think that that was kind of how BPD would be interpreted in the wider community. Because after that article came out, I was contacted on social media and via our email account from people just horrified that there was somebody working with children with personality disorder. And it was really not nice. Like, some people were so incensed that they actually copied in the editorial team of The Guardian to say how disgusting it was that they'd featured somebody who is in a position of trust with safeguarding children, and they had given them publicity and praise when really they're actually horrible, abusive individuals that should not be around children. And that was quite shocking to me because I've never had that kind of reaction before, and it was a bit of a wake-up call in terms of stigma and how people perceive it. I even had people saying, you know, if I found out that my child's teacher had a personality disorder, I would want them sacked. I would not want them near my child. And yeah, that was really, really shocking. I mean, I'm talking probably only maybe 5 or 6 pieces of communication out of all of the communication that we had, saying that we were doing really good work, but they really stick with you. And it's like, oh my God, like people actually hold these views still on BPD.
I'm really, really sorry that you had to have that directed at you, because that, like, that's a, you know, it's a personal attack, right?
It was definitely very upsetting, I think, but at the same time, you just think, you know, like these children that you're teaching, you don't know if your child in 5, 10, 15 years time is going to be diagnosed with a personality disorder themselves. Like, there are no role models really for personality disorders for young people to look up to and think, actually, you know, like they've gone out and they've done this, they've been a teacher. I'm not saying that I would ever tell somebody that I teach that I have a personality disorder, because I don't think that's a burden to carry. But there still needs to be people to show that actually a personality disorder isn't necessarily a life sentence. Like, you can still go out and still have a career and do what you love, and you know, you're not contaminating children. Like, personality disorders are not airborne. Like, a child who is standing next to me is not going to catch BPD. Like, it doesn't work like that.
I mean, every single episode that we do, right, we demonstrate like I love that all of us, everybody is at different stages of life and are excelling in different areas of their life, and you know, have joy in different areas of their life. And yeah, we all struggle sometimes, but we're human. And like, I like that, like exactly what you just said, this show helps like humanize us in all sorts of different like forms and ways. You know, maybe people who have been harmed by somebody with BPD before is having this opinion, or maybe somebody who has like a, you know, who has their own trauma and they're having difficulties with healing and processing and expressing themselves in like adequate ways, right? Or in respectful ways, or in just more like progressive and healing minded ways. And that's where I think a lot of stigma comes from, right? It comes from, like, that's where hate comes from. It's often ignorance. It's often a lack of healing your own pain.
I think it does come from a lot of people who have been hurt. And it's not just like, I understand being in a relationship with someone who's really going through it and with their BPD, it can be really difficult and it can feel exhausting. It can feel like there, you know, manipulation, and it can feel like, you know, really difficult for anyone to handle. But it doesn't mean that that person is coming from a really like antagonistic, negative, you know, purposely I don't know, abusive kind of way. It's there's a lot of pain under there, and that's what we're trying to show, right?
Yeah, and that pain can be really dysregulating, which is not to say that like being in pain gives you a free pass to act however you want. It's more that when we understand where other people are coming from, that can make it a little bit easier to navigate interpersonal interactions and find a way to deal with one another that's the most likely to lead to a positive outcome. So like for me, it makes a huge difference when I feel like other people see and recognize my pain. It makes it a lot easier for me to regulate my emotions, because I kind of feel like I have the space to have feelings, you know, and that's a difficult balance. I'm also not here to say that like it's other people's responsibility to act in the right way in order for me to be okay. The reality is humans are social animals. The way that we communicate to each other changes our emotional reactions, changes our ability to regulate. So it's sort of, I guess it's something that both sides have to work together on. And the better we understand each other, the easier that is.
Yeah, I think the best way to fight stigma, even if you don't feel confident speaking up, is to just be yourself, because the more normal or normalized examples that we have of people with BPD, the more acceptable it will become in society. And actually, people will not fear people with BPD or have preconceived ideas about what we're like, because the more visible we are as a community. Yes, we might have our struggles. Yes, there might be certain things that do reinforce stereotypes, but overall, there shouldn't really be any kind of separation between people with BPD and people that do not, because we're all human. And that might seem oversimplistic, but basically that's just what it boils down to.
Yeah, I
I'm so
agree.
glad you said that, because all the things that make BPD what it is, they're all human traits. You know, it's not like any of these things are foreign to the human experience. It's just that they are to a different degree, to the point that other people don't recognize it in themselves. But they're human things. It's not, we're not a different species. You know, we're all human beings. I feel like the way that I navigate stigma is very unconventional, in the sense that it never occurred to me to think of them in different words. I kind of reclaimed a lot of the words that were used against me and reframed them in a different way. So like when people call me attention seeking, for example, I think about, well, so what? Of course I'm trying to get your attention, but it's not because I just I'm sitting in a basement coming up with lists and ways to get people to pay attention to me, right? It's because I, as a social animal, have needs, and I'm trying to find a way to express those. I used to blame other people for my behavior and reactions, and I think taking sort of a personal responsibility stance and finding the things that were valid, like if somebody calls me attention seeking, taking a moment to reflect on, am I going about getting my needs met in a way that is dysfunctional? And if it is, what can I do to adjust my behavior? And if it's not, letting them know. Someone says you're attention seeking, my response is, okay, so what?
I mean, I do care what people think sometimes, but I think I'm also pretty good at not giving a fuck of what people think a lot of the time. So I think I'm lucky that I only present, unless you know what to look for, I only really present those more extreme BPD stereotypes in my intimate relationships. So out in the world, I'm not getting as much stigma. It's usually stigma, I told with my work story, it's usually stigma addressed towards other people that, and then I connect with those people, right? I feel like I'm also, I feel connected, but other people don't realize that I also have BPD. I'm trying to be more open about my struggles. And, I work at a university and I work with a ton of students who are struggling with their mental health, right? Who are going through a very difficult time themselves. Law school is full of a ton of pressure, and they've got no avenues to to feel their feelings or to, experience their symptoms. So I've also been trying to be a lot more honest in my workplace about what's going on with me. And just let people know that it's okay to be different. It's okay to do things differently, and just create spaces for that.
I feel like one of the biggest ways to fight stigma is by being vocal, and I know that that's not for everyone. I know that it's really difficult for a lot of people. We are all in a position where we feel comfortable doing this, even though it's scary sometimes, but it's definitely not for everyone. But it's being a part of the conversation in some way, deepening the understanding and trying to deepen the empathy because of the understanding.
Even if you're not vocal, just be kind, right? Just show what empathy and kindness looks like towards others. Every single person who acts from a place of pain is going to behave or do certain things that might cause harm to other people. Every single human being has done that. It does not make it okay. And the reason that we're doing this show is because it's not okay, right? Is because we're working towards healing and self-awareness and processing. And that's not just something that people with BPD have to do. That's something that like this whole world, everybody needs to do. Like, it's okay if you have resentment or if you feel anger towards somebody who has BPD. That's okay. That's normal. That's natural if you've had a negative experience with that human being, right? But it's like, how do you handle that anger? How do you process that? You know, like learning about it as much as you can, trying to understand what is actually going on as much as you can so that you can process and move on, right? That doesn't have to involve hate or lashing out or like stigma, right? You can engage with people with curiosity and empathy.
There's a long way to go in fighting stigma, and I do think that there is like a light at the end of the tunnel. I don't see this as something that is hopeless. I think maybe in the past it might have felt more hopeless, but there is such a movement. You know, it's groups like us, it's people like us putting this out there. It's, you know, even people in the world of psychology and psychiatry who are trying to create, you know, deeper understanding and change. And it's, you know, I think things are only going to get better and better for us. And so it's, you know, it's on us, and it's also on the people who are supposed to be, you know, helping us too.
Thank you so much, everyone, for watching. I hope that you got a nugget of information and hope that you can take on your journey forwards. Make sure that you like, subscribe, and turn on your notifications so you do not miss a single episode. Next week, we will be back for our media portrayals of BPD episode. So this was voted on by our patrons. Thank you so much, all of our patrons on Patreon, for your support. We could not do this without you. And thanks to you, we've got our topic for next week. And we're really looking forward to dissecting some of the different portrayals of BPD in the media. So come back for that, and we will see you next time. Bye.
Ta-da! Bye, 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 bye.